On the morning of March 12, 1928, the most trusted engineer in America stood at the foot of his newest dam, looking at a leak. Muddy water was seeping from the hillside beside it. And to a dam engineer, muddy water can mean the worst thing of all, that the dam is quietly washing away the ground it stands on. He looked at it, and he decided it was nothing. He had built the aqueduct that made Los Angeles possible. If William Mulholland said a dam was safe, then the dam was safe. He drove back to the city. A little under 12 hours later, a few minutes before midnight, the dam was gone. A wall of water went 54 miles down the valley to the sea, in the dark, while people slept. At least 431 of them never woke. No one has ever known the real number. This is the St. Francis Dam, and this is how the man who built modern Los Angeles erased a valley in the time it takes to fall asleep. At the start of the century, Los Angeles was a small city in a dry place, with no river worth the name and nowhere near enough water to grow. Its water was in the hands of a self-taught Irish immigrant who had started as a ditch digger and taught himself engineering by lamplight. His name was William Mulholland. He gave the city its lifeline, the Los Angeles Aqueduct, a line of concrete and steel that carried water 230 miles across the desert from the Owens Valley. When the water first poured down the spillway in 1913, Mulholland turned to the waiting crowd and said 5 words. There it is, take it. He was the most admired man in California, and so the city let him build as he saw fit. No state inspector reviewed his dams. No outside engineer checked his ground. Los Angeles trusted one man's judgment completely. To store the aqueduct's water, Mulholland chose a narrow canyon called San Francisquito in the hills north of the city, above a valley of farm towns. Between 1924 and 1926, he built the St. Francis Dam across it, a great curved wall of concrete, higher than a 15-story building. Behind it rose a reservoir holding almost 12.5 billion gallons of water, a year's supply for the city stacked up in a canyon directly above the towns downstream. While it was still being built, the city decided it wanted the reservoir bigger, so the dam was raised. Twice, about 20 feet in all. A taller dam holds back more water, and more water pushes harder. A taller dam needs a wider base to stand against that push. The St. Francis Dam was raised higher. Its base was never widened to match. The dam is only as strong as the ground it is anchored to, and the ground in San Francisquito Canyon was hiding 2 separate betrayals, one in each wall. On the eastern side, the rock was an old mica schist. Buried inside it, invisible from the surface, lay the scar of an ancient landslide, a whole hillside that had slid once, long before any city existed. When the reservoir filled, water soaked into that old wound and woke it. The eastern hillside began, very slowly, to move again. On the western side, the rock was a red conglomerate that looked solid and dry, but it had a flaw you could only find by testing it. Put this rock in water, and it softens and crumbles like a dry biscuit dropped in tea. So, an ancient landslide waking on one side, rock dissolving on the other, water forcing its way beneath the base and lifting it, and 20 extra feet of height the foundation was never built to carry. And here is the hardest part of the story. The geology that doomed this dam could not be seen in 1926. The landslide was buried. The tools to find it did not yet exist. The ground was lying, and it lied well. Almost as soon as the reservoir filled, the dam began to speak. Cracks opened in the concrete. Mulholland inspected them and called them normal. All concrete dams crack a little as they settle, he said, and these were nothing to fear. He was half right. The cracks themselves were ordinary. It was the water coming through them that was not. In the first months of 1928, new leaks opened along the abutments, and some of the water running out of them was muddy. Clear water leaking through a dam is only a nuisance. Muddy water is a warning. It means the water is not simply passing through the dam. It is carrying the dam's foundation away, grain by grain. On the morning of March 12, 1928, the dam's keeper, Tony Harnischweger, found a new leak at the western end, and the water was brown. Harnischweger lived at the very foot of the dam, with his companion and his 6-year-old son. He knew what brown water meant. He telephoned Los Angeles. Mulholland came at once, with his right-hand man, Harvey Van Norman. The 2 most experienced dam men in the city stood at the leak and studied it. The brown color, they decided, came from a road cut just above the leak. The flow was no worse than others they had lived with. They judged the dam safe, and they drove back to the city. It was late morning. The dam had a little under 12 hours left. The valley went to sleep. In the canyon, the dam stood in the dark, holding 12 billion gallons against a foundation that was silently letting go. At about 3 minutes before midnight, the eastern abutment gave way. The old landslide moved. The dam's flank went with it, and the whole eastern side broke loose. With one side gone, the water took the rest. The center wall was left standing alone, as the pieces on either side were torn away and flung down the canyon. One fragment of the broken dam, weighing 10,000 tons, was carried 3/4 of a mile down the canyon like a chip of wood. What came out of the broken dam was a wall of water more than 100 feet high, moving down a narrow canyon with nowhere for anyone to go. 5 minutes later, it reached Powerhouse Number 2, a generating station in the canyon below, where the men who ran the aqueduct lived with their families in cottages. There was no warning, and no higher ground close enough. 64 people at the powerhouse died in the dark, most of them the wives and the children, asleep when the water came. The water kept coming, out of the canyon and into the wider valley below, spreading and slowing but never stopping. In the riverbed near the county line, a construction camp lay asleep, 150 workers in tents. By morning, 84 of them were gone. Most never identified, many never found. The flood ran on through the night, down the Santa Clara River Valley, past Castaic Junction, past Piru, toward Fillmore and Santa Paula and the sleeping towns. But water can only move so fast, and word can move faster. Motorcycle patrolmen rode ahead of the flood, pounding on doors. Telephone operators stayed at their switchboards in the dark, ringing every line they could reach, telling the towns to run for the hills. Some of them stayed until the water was at the door. Where the warning came in time, people lived. Whole streets emptied into the hills minutes before the water arrived. Where it did not, they were taken in their beds. By 5:30 in the morning, the flood reached the Pacific near Ventura, 54 miles from the dam, carrying wreckage and bodies out into the sea. When the sun came up, the Santa Clara Valley was a field of mud 60 miles long. Where towns had stood, there was silt and wreckage, and the smell of the sea carried strangely inland. They pulled the dead out of the mud for weeks, and then for months. Bodies were found in the orchards, buried in silt, tangled in the wreckage, and washed up along the coast for years afterward. The official count was 385. Later work raised it to 431, and then higher still. The true number was never known because many of the dead were migrant farm workers whose names were on no list at all. Among the very first to die had been the dam's own keeper, Tony Harnischfeger, and his 6-year-old son in the cottage at the foot of the dam. His body was never certainly found. The county and the state convened an inquest. For weeks, they took the canyon apart and put the engineers on the stand. Their verdict was careful. The failure they found was an error in engineering judgment. The foundation had been fatally weak in ways that they accepted could not have been known when the dam was built. And they wrote one sentence that would change how America built. The construction and operation of a great dam, they said, should never be left to the sole judgment of one man. William Mulholland took the stand himself. He did not hide behind the finding. He asked for the blame. "Don't blame anyone else," he said. "You just fasten it on me. If there was an error in human judgment, I was the human. The only ones I envy about this thing," he told them, "are the ones who are dead." One piece of the dam did not fall. The center section still stood in the emptied canyon, alone, 100 feet of concrete where a dam had been. People came from all over to look at it. They called it the Tombstone. It stood for a year, until a visitor climbing on it fell and was killed, and the city dynamited the last of the dam into the ground. Mulholland retired within the year. The city had loved him for the water he gave it, and he spent his last years in near silence and died in 1935. But the sentence from the inquest outlived him. Within a year, California created the first state review of every dam it did not build itself. Never again would one man's word be enough. A dam is a promise. It tells the people downstream, "You can sleep, I will hold." The St. Francis Dam kept that promise for 2 years, and broke it in the dark, and took a valley with it, because the one man trusted to check it had already driven home. At least 431 people died in the valley that night. The real number is still out there, uncounted, somewhere under 80 years of silt and orchard and sea. Cold Wake is an autopsy of how proud things come apart. If the forgotten deserve a witness, subscribe. The next inquiry is already open.